Welcome to our YouTube channel, guys. Today we are going to go back in time. I'm sure that you may have wondered in your lifetime, who am I and why am I here? Today we have a special program, a program which is based on science to understand the beginning of human nature, the beginning of the whole universe. We're going to talk about the Big Bang theory and how the universe evolved and how we became humans. It's a scientific discussion and I'm sure that you're going to love this. We will also talk about the human brain, the brain physiology, the anatomy, and the focus behind memory and the recall power. If you're a guy who has forgotten your mother's or father's birthday, or else missed your wife's birthday or your anniversary, this is the right topic of program for you. We always wondered, why are we here and what's our purpose of life? We always tend to think sometimes how this all began, the universe, beginning, how it all happened. Today in our program, I will talk to you about this, the activities that we need to understand in terms of the brain development, the neurophysiology and anatomy behind it. To talk about it, we have the most suitable person today, who is Dr. Roohullah. He's one of the consultant anesthetists who's working at District General Hospital, Negombo. He's a consultant who has served and saved a lot of lives and a lot of critically ill patients. Today, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Can I just please know from you about yourself first, and also what fascinates you as a consultant anesthetist who's into critical illness and who is into managing a lot of ill patients and also like serving in this Sri Lankan society for a very long time. What fascinates you, life, sir?
Thank you, Namal, for having me in this talk. I appreciate that opportunity given to me. What I actually, my passion was actually at the, going beyond the medical field. Though I am practicing a doctor, my passion is going beyond that to explore what science says and so on. But basically, as a doctor, I qualified with interest in serving the public and also focusing mainly on subjects like where I can apply my initial learnings in A level, like physics and so on and so forth. So I found the best combination to be an anesthetist where a lot of physics matters. So I wanted to become an anesthetist and I became one. Now I am using a lot of my physics knowledge, including the one I learned in A level, which is subject my favorite subject and fascinating subject. I apply a lot of physics in my day-to-day work as an anesthetist and intensive care management of the patients. Also, the subject of physiology I learned in the medical curriculum, also very fascinating on top of the physics I learned. So, for both of those reasons, I selected this profession as an anesthetist, but really rewarding my spirit and rewarding my expectations.
Dr. Roohullah, going beyond and starting our topic of the program today, a lot of people are fascinated by the human brain, how it all works, what is the neuroanatomy and how does it really work, the neurons, how does it really help us to remember things. And as you know, for a child, it's very important that the child sit for exam and get through and you go for your high grades. And also when you face your ordinary levels and A levels, maybe for an exam, so when you go to the university, it's the most divine power that they should have is the recall power. Sometimes like you may have been studying a lot, but if you cannot recall it at the point that it really requires, sometimes they may face problems, Dr. Roohullah. So in my opinion, Dr. Roohullah, how did you become an anesthetist, like to understand all these physics concepts as well as like how these all things work, as well as what is your tips of understanding? For example, if you are a child, if you are a person who's studying, maybe it's good for a parent to know as well for a child's memory development. So how the human brain evolves, how does it tend to help the recall power of the memory? Can you just please elaborate a little bit about the human brain as well as a little bit of physiology to the people like who are watching this channel?
Yeah, a good question. Actually, neuroscience, neurophysiology, including all that, is still major project in the field of science. They work on a title called Human Brain Project. So that is kind of a very phenomenal subject. Everybody is now wondering about how this inorganic as organic matter just created all this sense of consciousness and the world around us as we believe. So, actually when you take the brain, it is considered to have about 100 billion neurons in it. Is a billion, but 100 billions of neurons are, I mean, crowded in that small space of our human brain.
Dr. Roohullah, just to interrupt you for a second. So, all these neurons are there from the very beginning of your brain, from the birth, or does we
actually at the end of, I mean, at the time of birth, nearly almost all of the neurons are, I mean, formed.
Okay.
What the neuron does, it has an axon called one end, the other one is the dendrites. There is a thing called body cell, I mean neuron cell, and there is a projection from one side is called axon, the other side small projection, they are called dendrites. So, each of these neuron unimaginable connection they create with every other neurons. There are about minimum of 1000 to 10,000 each neuron connects with the other neurons. So, a single neuron connects with another 1000 to 10,000 neurons in the neighboring field. So, such is the complexity and such is the functional complexity of this brain, that brain has to have enough energy to maintain all these connections and its survival of these all these anatomical structures. So, what happens at the birth is child is born with 100 billion neurons, but when they after birth, what happens thereafter is the brain size goes up. So, how comes if the neurons are all built, why should the brain size increase? It should increase because the connections are still being formed.
Okay.
The cell size will be increased, the neuron size will be increased, further myelination of the sheath will happen, the neurons and so on. So, all that takes more volume. So, that is the reason the skull tend to increase in size. This at birth, the neurons are nearly all complete. The connections are growing, I mean more and more connections are forming, more and more myelination of this thing happening. All that takes another 2 to 3 years. So, by after 2 to 3 years probably most of the connections are formed, but it tend to go on till the age of 25. I mean actually it's in anatomical terms it goes about up to 5 years or 6 years, but beyond that even during adolescence there are some changes happening in the brain, especially in the prefrontal cortex where the cognitive power goes up, and then up to 25 years there may be changes in the prefrontal cortex of the brain where a lot of changes happening, including the complexity, wisdom and other cognitive powers. So, it is a process that has been happening, but at the end of 25 years there is no further growth, and then you have to, then there is a thing called plasticity. So, the plasticity is very important in learning because the brain is a clump of matter of many elements formed into protein, lipids and so on and so forth, but structured in the neuronal units. And then finally, they are in states, more than one states. That means the ability to change from one state to other, the elements, one state ionic or non-ionic or some other forms, they keep changing. Because thanks to that phenomenon in the plasticity, we can learn. We can keep on learning even till the time of death.
Dr. Roohullah, just to touch upon a few things that you previously explained about the brain development and the neuroanatomy behind it. We always tend to understand certain things. For example, when a thing becomes more complex, we tend to study it a little bit more. And sometimes when things are simpler, it's easy for us to understand and easy for us to recall. And I have heard that the memory is on certain layers. Sometimes if you keep on repeating, then it becomes a permanent memory. Sometimes there are called short-term memories and long-term memories. And like for a student or for a person who's going for an interview, maybe for an exam, I mentioned like earlier, the recall power becomes very important for that person's personality and also to win life in his so-called journey of life. Dr. Roohullah, what fascinates us in terms of having a good memory? Like what can improve our memory and what can recall our memory in terms of understanding of this brain anatomy and the brain physiology?
Yeah. Now, actually the memory itself has three components, like when you study something or when you look at something and remember or whatever the way, there are three stages by which the memory is formed in the brain. The first one is encoding, that is while studying you are giving attention to absorb that subject, and then that is in the brain translated as encoding into neurons and neuronal connection and so on. And then the next stage is storage. That storage happens in certain places like in the prefrontal cortex or hippocampus and so on and so other structures. And then the storage can be either long term or short term. If it is long term, it has to be involved with the cortical sustainability. Contribution by the cortex is very important in long term memory sustainability. And then the third one is retrieval. So, encoding, storage and retrieval. Storage is usually in hippocampus, if it is, and then the retrieval is a process by which you try to recall. So, for that again the cortical and hippocampus part of the brain has to be, they are instrumental in recalling that memory. If it is a long term memory, you do not need active recalling, the cortical function alone is enough. But if it is a long term memory or short term memory that needs quick retrieval, you have to have the hippocampus working on it. So, in certain diseases like where you lose either dementia and so on and so forth, one of these some of these areas are affected. So, that is the reason you will not be able to recall the short term memories, but you will be able to recall whatever the long term ones. The ionic process that happens is if you repeatedly do something, if you repeatedly read something, or if you go in depth of reading something, your connections being formed along the certain groups of neurons will start fire together. So, they call it those fire together, wire together. They start firing and wiring together. Every time somebody asks a question, they immediately click and you fire the same neurons and they are wired together, then you will immediately retrieve from wherever that storage is there. So, when that happens, your ability to remember, retrieve, though you can remember, but you can't retrieve, very important. So, such instances now how do you improve this encoding? Encoding, if you have to study, you study concentration, focusing is very important. When you encode, focusing is important. And then you should not cram, should not cram sessions. You should study maybe 45 minutes and then you take rest and then come back and study after maybe another 45 minutes and so on.
What do you mean to say is, Dr. Roohullah, that the number of hours, like maybe you go on from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock continuously is not good for your brain to recall?
Exactly. So, you can give even small breaks like 5, 10, 15 minutes, but you have to break, because there are a lot of neuronal substances working while studying, like serotonin coming into play, dopamine is coming into play. As I believe, if for a short time it is the dopamine, and then if it is long time it is serotonin, something like, if I am not mistaken, and then that cycle just after some time it tires off and then you can't concentrate. You will keep studying, but your absorption, encoding process gets stuck, and then you won't get encoded. So, that is why you have to study in short sessions, and then better to sleep after you study, and maybe after about 6 sessions you do, and then you do not keep on reading session every break, you do not do that. After 6 or 7 sessions like that, you have to take a full night sleep or full night rest, which helps you to handle, which helps the brain to handle the encoded messages to store. The storage is very important. During the sleep, your brain rests so that the storage happens well, and that storage is fine, the retrieval also will be good. So, you have to study probably without any distractions. Then you can have models like you can think of mnemonics to remember, or you can visualize what you study, like what Einstein did when he thought of this time travel and all that. Visualize what you study. Okay, now you visualize, just imagination, and then you can elaborative rehearsal.
Okay.
That means now you think, you study, and then you close the book, and then you think about it.
Okay.
And then rehearse what you studied, and then elaborate on what you studied. Why can't it be like this? Why can't it be like this? So something like that. You have to elaborate and expand on that, and then rehearse what you studied.
Okay.
So those are few tips. There are so many other tips you can use to improve your encoding power, storage power, and then retrieval power.
Dr. Roohullah, these days most of the people are at a lockdown. Due to the COVID pandemic crisis, most of the people are not moving out of their homes. So most of the students are unable to go to a class or go to a school. So they study at home. Having these tabs for a long time, Dr. Roohullah, for example, like that may be a young child who is like grade 5, grade 6 and grade 7, or maybe an A-level student. So your brain may be at a different level of development for those children in terms of grasping the knowledge around. So does these waves, like the screen timing, does it can those things affect?
From my limited knowledge, what I can say is, when you read a book, it's a hard thing, and then you read the light reflected, visible light reflected comes to your eyes. Here, of course, on top of the visual light, there are electromagnetic radiations of the other spectrum coming as well. So how much that will damage your eye, and then as a process, in response to the eye different stimulation, what the brain will do, I am not quite certain about that. But what I would is, it will be more tiring to study a screen rather than studying from a book.
Okay.
That I am sure about. But what is the consequences of doing? How long you can hold on to it?
Yes.
I am not quite sure.
Yeah.
But on top of, but the only good thing is the screen is backlit.
Okay.
So that advantage is there.
Okay.
I mean, the light comes from it.
Okay.
Whereas the book is a reflected light that comes.
Okay.
So you might find it, some people may find it reading over this on the screen will be good.
Okay.
Because it's a backlit one.
Okay.
Again, this thing. But overall, I think there are, because of the other phenomena of the electromagnetic field that may come with this, you have to, I have to caution that it's not as good as the reading books.
Great. So I hope our viewers are clear a little bit in terms of understanding and also encoding and recalling power, because most of because of the colleagues and because of our friends, sometimes they tend to forget even their wife's birthdays and even anniversaries and even wedding days. So I think it will be a good factor for them to remind certain things and get it recalled during the process. So Dr. Roohullah, I think we have just keep an open forum about these tab usage and the computer usage, because recently there were some stories behind some children coming to hospitals, like even spending more and hours of tabs. So that's the point, that the parents should be cautious, and rather than giving so much of time on a tabs and a computer, and also get them to outplay a little bit, like and to children to be children. Dr. Roohullah, like going to our topic, the main idea of today's program is to understand how this all happened, the beginning of the universe, how this thing all happened, the Big Bang theory. Dr. Roohullah, we know, I hope that from the research and from the science, we understand that the world began about 13.7 billion years ago, and also with the chloroplast about 2.5 billion years ago, the oxygen was there and the gases were formed, and even little by little the stars were formed, and how this whole galaxy began. So like, there are theories saying that there was something before even Big Bang theory, and sometimes the Big Bang theory is the theory that actually got everything started as per the Einstein's relativity laws and all that. So coming into our main topic of today's program, Dr. Roohullah, I know you are expert in that area because you have read a lot, you have understood a lot, and you have connected most of these missing pieces in this puzzle. So let me just ask from you openly, what do you think about the origin of the universe?
Yeah, the Big Bang is a concept created by the majority of the scientists working on this project of how the world began, by observing certain things that not observed before. So they came to a conclusion, this universe wouldn't have been this size all the time. it should have been either shrinking and expanding, or it just started from a single point and suddenly started expanding at a speed unimaginable, and then with the energy that was concentrated in that single point, which is called singularity, which was timeless because it didn't have enough space, then this infinitely small, infinitely dense, infinitely hot, infinitely energy concentrated singularity point, I believe maybe it was connected to some other thing called white hole, which is the reverse of the black hole, which started pumping into it the matter, or it just started a bubble universe, another universe coalescing with this, feeding into this. There are theories, but how it actually happened we don't know. So, this when it started expanding unimaginable speed, within fraction of seconds it became the size of the galaxy that we are living in. And then it has been expanding for last 13.67 years of universe, and where we are now up to this point. So, this expansion created a lot of things. When it expanded initially, it became a little bit less hotter, less dense, less energetic. So, the energy cannot be destroyed, the energy has to be converted into something else. The energy converted into matter. It is evident from Einstein equation of E is equal to mc square. Energy and matter are interchangeable. Energy can be converted into matter, matter can be converted into energy. So, this concentrated energy, as it started expanding and cooling, it somehow converted into matters, which are called quantum particles. The quantum particle has two classes, one is quark, other one is leptons. The quantum particles, there are 6 set of them, and the leptons there are 6 set of them. Why they are called differently is because of the size and the mass. Usually the quark particles are up and down, those are ones still we are existing. All the matters has this quark particle, up and down quark particles. But at the beginning of the universe, even wherever there is some galactical activity going now, there are other quantum particles like charm and strange, top and bottom particles. We don't see them, but all the matter we see in this whole universe at the moment having the presence of up or down quantum particles, and then they spin in one full circle, whereas the lepton ones are small and then less heavier, and they have half spin. So, because of that they are known as leptons, which has two parts. One is electron, there are other particles like neutrons. The electron has on that order muon and then tau, and then particles, and then the other part is neutrino. Okay. So, all these quantum particles and the electrons are charged, but neutrinos not charged, okay. They are neutral, right. Neutrino also there are quantum electron neutrino, tau neutrino, and then other neutrino, okay. Right, muon neutrino. So, these now at the beginning these quantum particles formed, they are quarks, and then leptons, the electrons. So, both of them after some time as they keep expanding, the quantum particles clump together, the quark particles, both of them two up quark particles and one down quark particles combine together to form proton, what is called proton. Okay. This proton became the nucleus of any atom, but at that time the nucleus didn't have, so it was positive always, because quantum up quark particle has 2/3 positivity, and then down quark is minus 1/3. Okay. So, you have 2 of up quarks, it has about 4/3 of them, and then this is minus 1/3. So, it eventually will lead to a 1 plus, okay, of this thing. That is why you get the proton 1 plus, and the neutrons which formed later actually has 2 down particles and 1 up quarks. So, they cancel out, and that is why they become neutral and they do not have charge. So, initially what formed is the proton, which is the nucleus of the actual hydrogen as we know. This hydrogen was without any electron circling it. So, it has to expand further, because the in a smaller space where there was lot of energy still, lot of heat in still, and lot of density still, the electron started crisscrossing, and they very difficult to capture them to keep it with the iron. So you call this that is called wall of light. If you go back to about 360 or 70,000 after Big Bang years of this thing, the electron were shattering all the light. So you saw only the lights. You can't see a matter. Okay. You saw only lights everywhere. So because the electron were not captured, then when it started cooling and expanding further with the expansion, further cooling and less energy dense, less density of the matter. The first time it happened because of the quarks, because of the thing called strong nuclear force, which is gluon, by gluon, which is called gluon, which combines all these quarks to form either proton or neutron. Whereas this that is a physical force, that is physics. The nuclear synthesis is the physics. The proton is creation of proton is physics. Now next step is, because they are charged plus and the electron is minus, and electron loses their energy as it expands, it is easily captured by this thing. Where when the first time you get a thing called chemistry, attachment, it attracts each other, the minus, and this is more electromagnetic attraction. So the plus captures the minus, and then it tells the electrons to go around it. So you form finally the hydrogen molecule, hydrogen ion atom. The hydrogen atom formed. First time the electron is now with the hydrogen. The electron is it doesn't spread, it doesn't crisscross everywhere, it just circling one. Whatever the light comes, it absorbs and reflects. Then first time you started seeing matter as cloud of cosmic cloud or dust or whatever, when the electron got hooked in the nucleus of this thing, and it was spinning around the nucleus. Okay. The hydrogen atom was formed initially. When the hydrogen atom, then another chemical force, this because of the interactions of the ion, it became a molecule, H2. Then that was the universal sole substance at that time. Okay. So, but then later on came, when the hydrogen atoms formed, there was a third physical force came into it. First it was a gluon, which is a strong nuclear force, okay. Strong nuclear. Then came the chemistry, so that is physics, this is chemistry, and then the gravity came. So any two molecules, any two atoms start attracting each other. So that is how there was clumps of clouds, clumps of this thing. And then when the attraction is more and more powerful, they accumulate and they become a clump, and that density becomes more, and that density causes, because of the Newton's theory, the mass is more, now the gravity is more, that pulls more and more molecules towards this, and then finally a cloud in the middle, there was a thing developing, a protostar was developing, because of this clumping of billions and billions and trillions of molecules clumping together, and finally form a gas hydrogen giant called star, including our sun. This star formation happened in the middle, but what happened then, because of the mass is so great now, it even the adjacent molecules it attracts and forms, so it becomes a massive star, very massive star. But when it becomes a massive star, the farther apart this thing, all those close to the star, it's now clumped and deformed. Then there is a space there which is without matter, but outside that whatever there is there still circling around, that is called protoplanetary disk. Okay. So in the center you get a star, and around it millions and million miles in the radius outward, you have this protoplanet still circling. Okay. But what happens is they are not that dense, but still there are formations of small molecules capturing because of the gravity effect, and they were forming accretion, thing called accretion, and small rocks and these small dust particles and so on, and they were forming around this thing, but they can't come to the center of this thing. Yes. The gravity is not enough to capture them because they are spinning. Okay. So there is a radial force which is spreading them about. So because of the radial force of their spinning movement, centripetal force, okay. This can't capture because they are far and they are having a centripetal force, so they can't, the sun can't capture them. Okay. So they became a protoplanet disk, while this one became a massive star. And finally what happens is, because of the center of the star was so condensed, so hot, when more and more matters are put together, they always create more temperature. Okay. So the temperature build to millions of degrees in the center of the star. That caused a nuclear reaction called nuclear fusion.
Okay.
So, that is called a quantum tunneling effect. Two of the hydrogen molecule, the nucleus of them join together, fuse together and form helium.
Okay.
And like that another form, deuterium, tritium, and then finally 4 of them fuse and produce the helium, including when they fuse they liberate energy.
Okay.
They can't just fuse, when they liberate. So, when they liberate energy, all of them, remember this hydrogen ions all protons. So, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus.
Okay.
So, 4 of them when they join they can't sit together. So, they have to release certain energy in the form of boson with the nuclear weak nuclear force.
Okay.
So, I am discussing 3 forces, fundamental forces in physics. One is the strong nuclear force I have discussed, second one is the weak nuclear force just now I said, and the gravity and the electromagnetic force, which I explained. So, these 4 forces, including when it releases bosons, that is the weak nuclear force, the proton becomes a neutron. Okay. So, 2 of the protons become neutrons. Okay. So, now the helium finally has 2 neutrons and 2 protons, and 4, because of the atom has a spin electron spinning it, now it has got 4 electrons also in the orbits.
Okay.
So, when that happened, the helium, then when the helium, when the density is so high, even the helium will be pushed to fuse, and okay, by the further fusing of the quantum tunneling effect, it becomes another more complex, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, so much so, and including all these heavy elements, all these were formed. And then at some point the inside availability of the hydrogen was so poor, then finally it can't resist the pressure of the sun trying to collapse in. Okay. So, its sun collapses finally, but that has a reaction. When the sun collapses, they have equal and opposite reaction, which is called a blast. Okay. When it blasts, it spreads all its heavy elements, which goes all the way to protoplanetary disk and then deposit into the, in addition to the hydrogen that is there, they deposit into that. In the meantime, while this is fusions happening, you have this the sun having a thing called solar winds. Okay. The solar winds are so powerful, electromagnetic winds, they just strip the gas off. Okay. So, that is what you can see in our solar system. It will just push the solar gases away, all the protoplanetary gases away. Okay. Those who, the solid ones, because of their weight, they can't be pushed away. Okay. So, all those planets, Mercury, Venus, and then the Earth and the Mars, all of them are terrestrial planets, which are rocky planets. So, they couldn't be pushed far away from the solar winds. Okay. And but they were they were circling close to the sun, closer to the sun. I mean in terms of the astronomical units I am talking about. So, they couldn't be pushed farther away, and because they had very little gas in them. Okay. Right. So, now when that happens, all the gas will be pushed to the exterior. Okay. So, and then the small particles are small particles, the asteroid belts. Asteroid belt has a small rocky asteroid. So, they were pushed farther away. Okay. Even farther away pushed the gases. Okay. So, that is how your Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all of them are gaseous planets. Though they have a solid, because of the protoplanetary stage they coalesced and became solid. When the sun went into supernova and blasted, went ballistic and then blasted, and those metals that were formed, all of them captured by those protoplanets, and then they became planets, and around the planets there are enough clouds, those were formed into moons. So, all this happened, all this solar system, whatever that atom found other than in the sun, our current sun, in the Jupiter, in the Earth, in the moon, everywhere, are all, the atoms are all formed in originally, whatever that other than the helium, whatever that is formed in other than the hydrogen, whatever that is formed are all formed in the sun. Okay. The molecules developed later on, okay, all the planets, that is where the chemistry and then the biology came. Okay. So, now then it expanded, then the sun's power went down after the first blast. Now we believe this current sun is the third or second or third generation of the sun. It was not the original sun that was born of just after the Big Bang. So this is the third generation sun, and still having its function because of the hydrogen store is still there. So it's still the nuclear reaction, like in the nuclear fusion is going, hydrogen is being converted to helium, helium is converted further, and that will run a course of another 5 billion years, and then it will have its end when it will go again bellicose and then blast. That is a different topic to talk about. But then the planets we will take. When the sun became small, it started radiating less heat. Then became the protoplanetary disks, and including the ones that the initial heat all then went down because they expanded, and then the heat became less. So for example, if we take the Earth's temperature dropped, and because of thanks to the gravity, all these rocks combined and the core was formed. When the Earth started cooling down further and further, a thing called freezing, fusion of gas molecules, including the dust, the H2O that was spread, hydrogen and oxygen molecule that was in the steam, condensed into water. When they condensed water, those rocky, this is a rocky thing, it is not a round, but the gravity has a tendency to form rocks into more like spherical, because the gravity is always toward the center. It won't like a square or rectangle. It will always try to compress into a square, because the center of the gravity is in the center of the huge mass. So that is why you get it. But there will be some up and down like projections like Himalaya, and then there will be depreciations like Mariana Trench and all that. So with the cooling of this became water molecule, they condensed to become water, and they filled all these spaces that were the depressions. And on top of that, they were bombarding from the comets, which is icy comets, and they brought a lot of water, and then the water became a feature of the Earth. So when these water filled bodies on the surface of the Earth were formed, they were just not the water only. They had all the other elements in it, like carbon, nitrogen, and the hydrogen and oxygen were there, carbon, nitrogen, and so many other elements in that. So that formed a medieval soup. And on top of that, at the early ages of the Earth, there were a lot of radiation coming from the early sun. And those radiation, including the ultraviolet, caused some chemical reaction to form substances that were found anywhere else. Probably other planets may be there, but on the Earth it formed. Those include, one of that comes into the mind is the nucleotide, the formation of nucleotide, which is an essential part of the basic biological unit called DNA or RNA, whatever that matter. So this formed, and this has been proven, this is not a theory, this has been proven in the labs by mixing all these elements and sending ultraviolet rays, and they found there are new molecules formed, and they are kind of identical to these nucleotides. So when this formed, and likewise the phosphate formed, likewise the sugar formed, and all them got together, and then finally formed the wonderful creation of the biology, initial biology. That is the basic unit of biology, which is DNA. When the DNA formed, it has a sequence of nucleotides, or sequence of it has a spine like thing which is built entirely by phosphate and glucose, and to that on a side arm attached to is the nucleotides, which is the nitrogen base. So DNA means deoxyribonuclease, nucleic acid. So nucleic acid is actually the nucleotide, deoxyribo is for the sugar, nucleic acid is actually the phosphate given by the phosphate, because the nucleotide is a base. So this formed in a sequence. Then when the nucleotide formed, all these molecules, for some funny reason, which is for the universe, that is the wonder of universe. Universe is always probabilistic. You always has a chance of evolving into something unimaginable. So the formation of life is an accident. It is not something planned as against all the philosophies. I am not confronting or in conflict with any philosophy. This is what the science says. The development or the formation of DNA is entirely by an accident. It is a probability that happened 1 in a billion or 1 in a trillion, we do not know how. That is why the life in the whole universe is very, very rare. On that point, if you expand it, intelligent life is extremely rare, intelligent life like us. So, when the DNA formed, they started forming in blocks. They combined one nucleotide combined with sugar and phosphate, and then they started forming chains, and they started. So, initially it was a small DNA, about 30-40 sequence of nucleotides or nucleotides rather, and then they started forming in hundreds joined to each other in a chain, and then when it exceeded a threshold, it became replicating, started replicating itself. That is what the DNA is. The DNA's function is replication, making copy of its own, which no other molecule in the whole world can do. It is spontaneous replication of copying its own. That facility, when it came, the life came into being. So, then, but in the medieval soup, there were a lot of competition. The medieval soup now becoming less and less resourceful, because the more and more molecules are joining. So, whatever to do, the DNA that is formed has to fight with another DNA. That is where the selection, I mean the survival of the fittest came. So, that is evolution. Those weak molecules just surrendered and gave them up. They digested and assimilated into this thing. That is how the molecules started. But there were millions and billions of molecules formed like that. And then finally, they started replicating. But there were enemies all the time trying to sabotage this or harm this DNA. So, what have to do? Now, you have to protect the DNA that is formed, and because the replication is important function for its perpetration and sustainability of the DNA. So, what it has to do? It has to form a cover around it. So, somehow the DNA found a coding that is appropriate to form some protein and lipid molecules to form a called cell membrane or cell wall. That is when the cell wall came. That is what you call now prokaryotes. So, that is a bacteria now, because the replicating DNA found for its survival, it needs to be covered. So, it covered and that became bacteria. The bacteria then, because of the replication faculty, it started multiplying along with the cover. Now, it is a bacteria. The bacteria did not stop there, evolution further happened, and most of the bacteria would have been different DNA, different this thing, because it is a medieval soup it formed. So many millions different bacteria, one survival, again the survival of the fittest, some of the bacteria just surrendered and killed off their DNAs, survival ones formed into the number of bacteria now we see. And then the bacteria, the DNA went on to become more complex and formed a thing called archaea. That is a very primitive kind of algae. Then that did not stop there, the algae became plants. Between the algae, the very primitive algae and the plants, there is an important difference. Now, even the algae was the DNA, there was other fighting. So, there are a lot of competition, they had to protect their DNA further. Then they have to create a thing called nucleus, covered by a nucleus membrane on top of the cell membrane which holds the plasma. So, now further protected. So, you got the prokaryotes, from the prokaryotes you got the eukaryotes, that is when the cell wall, nuclear membrane formed. So, it is further double protected now. So, they became more robust and they started spreading, and they became to different DNAs, and some of them became the bacteria, the original bacteria remains as bacteria, but there were small differences became into algae, and from that the small difference became into plants, and from that another DNA became evolved into fungi.
So, Dr. Roohullah, what do you mean to say is that the DNA got mutated, or DNA got it is not the same copy that got repeated?
Exactly, because the medieval soup had so many opportunities. You do not know how many forms of DNA formed.
Okay.
each of them were not the same, they were not similar.
Okay.
A single DNA that was replicated, we do not know they were identical copies even.
Okay.
They would have been different copies of DNA, we do not know. So, but initially they formed as bacteria, but the competition, some of the bacteria killed off, some of them survived, even them they had their DNA diversity. So, some of them further evolved according to, like Charles Darwin's theory, evolved into archaea, that is primitive algae, and from them also their diversity, some of them evolved into plants, and from the plants also from the archaea, some of them developed into fungi, or even the plants development, early plants are very micro and they became fungi, some of them became because of the diversity, and from the fungi the protozoa came, the animal part, the plant is the botanical side, this thing, animal kingdom came, protozoa, single cellular organism. This single cell organism is even more robust, because they can move, plants can't move.
Yeah.
Plants has the facility to use up the sun's energy to meet their demand of energy demand, and excess they stored for their kids or for the further propagation of their genes. But the protozoa can move, it can find energy, and with that came lot of other threats. When they would move to unfamiliar territories, there are a lot of fights happening, so some of them killed off, some of them developed into, whoever that survived and then became crustaceans, the molluscum, the prawns and so on, and then from them whatever the some of the DNA diversity again formed, some of them formed into fish, then the fish, then there are a lot of population. Now diversity of creatures hanging around in the small area, so there are a lot of competition, they want to escape, now they want to escape from their competitors and enemies, so they had to finally, because the water is so crowded, they have to finally transform to become a land animal, which is amphibian. So, amphibian, they developed into amphibian, all DNA, and then the DNA builds its survival machine. These are all called you, me, bacteria, butterfly, leech, snake, all are their survival bodies designed and created by the DNA, right. And the DNA now it is spreading, and now it is amphibians. Amphibians became after some time reptiles, not all of them, I mean some of them still remains as amphibian, isn't it? Fish remains fish.
Yes.
So, then the reptiles are very nasty animals, reptiles, they are very vicious, very nasty, and lot of competition. So, even the land became impossible to live, so you have to take a fly,
Okay.
you have to be airborne, the birds came.
Okay.
And some of the land based reptiles, then because of the DNA diversity, some of them branched into mammals,
Okay.
right. Some of them branched into, they took off as birds, some of them branched into mammals, the early mammals, and the mammals then further evolved because of the diversity. Remember that medieval soup, we do not know how many kinds of DNA was there, not one of them, maybe two of them identical was impossible, we do not know, maybe there would have been possibilities because of the universe is probabilistic, so it could happen, but it is a very rare probability.
Yeah.
So, then finally came man, but in the interim what happened is, when the protozoa became a multicellular organ, the problem is not only protection. Now, for protozoa it is protection from the enemy and protection and its replication, right. So, the bacteria also protection from the enemy and then this thing. So, they are just very living things, but with no ability to feel, I mean feel in the sense they do not have consciousness, they do not have creative power, whether software or hardware, they do not have. So, software creation it will became this. Now, the bacteria will respond only to the enemy, nothing else it knows, and the reproduction. The protozoa may be a little bit higher worst, and then came the fish, it will be higher worst. But when the protozoa became multicellular, initially the cell has to look after its energy demand and replication and fight off the enemies. Now, it could easily be done using the space around it. Now, when the multicellular organism develops, there are a lot of cells, they can't deal with all the time in the surrounding. Then there has to be a system formed to look after their energy demand, to fight their enemies, and for reproduction and for their survival. So, all the cell, because of the cell energy saving strategy of the DNA, it produces such systems in our body to look after. Now, every cell needs to be fed, they can't be fed individually, it is not energy saving.
Okay.
Energy consumption is very high.
No.
So, they have to produce a system that circulates every cells with energy, that is the blood circulation cable. And then they should escape from an enemy, they have to use their muscles.
Yeah.
Then the muscle can't be used, they have to have a sensing organ, there is a threat, and then they have to use the faculty of muscle using that sense and to use that muscle to escape. For that you need a nervous system. Okay. So, the nervous system came into being. So, to escape from the threats, you need a nervous system that responds. So, every cell can't do on its own. So, a system formed which looked after the sole function of the survival from the enemies, and other things like thirst, hunger and all that started, and then they, because the nervous system, when they have to feed, they can't overfeed, underfeed, they have to feed appropriately, and the blood circulation not only did give the energy every cell demanded, it carried their waste, right, and also it gave immunity. So, immune system came into the play also. So, immunity, if the cells invades inside, that will be fought off, whatever the outside skin will protect, that is another system protecting. So, so on and so forth, it became more and more complex animal, and that became this thing. So, up to the fish point you have the brain, and this even after protozoa a little bit of molluscum, and then after that even molluscum has a little bit of nervous cell, this thing nervous system, and then brain became more and more powerful. Okay. So, mammals, when it came to reptiles, the brain has three parts: stem, limbic system, and then neocortex. So, initially what happened is the reptiles and even the ones before, the fish and so on, and the amphibians, all of them had some brain function. They were not that they did not have that much developed limbic system. Okay. They had rudimentary, but they had the brain stem for their breathing and heart regulation, circulation, all that, everything regulated by this thing. So, they have to have that. So, did that. So, when it came to reptile, the now limbic system is more developed, but limbic system is so nasty because the hippocampus, amygdala and so on, they are with emotions, they control, amygdala is what controls the emotion and things, but very little neocortex they had. That is why reptile people, this is like a reptile, that means he can't control his feeling, control his emotions kind of things. So, now when it came to reptiles, they developed that limbic system. What their threat they identified, they responded it, because limbic system very important in finding out the threats, because that pumps your body with the adrenaline, I mean the catecholamines that boost your muscle power, and then you escape suddenly.
Yeah, Dr. Roohullah, all these systems, your circulation system, your nervous system, the immune system, were these all encoded at the very beginning at the DNA?
Exactly. But as I said, because of the gene variation and gene progressing into different directions, the gene selection, the selection become more and more pure, and then it leads to further protein synthesis. That protein synthesis will lead to system formation, circulation, musculoskeletal, nervous, bones, skin, all that became one after another. There have been mutation as well. The mutation could have happened early life, some mutation, even from chimpanzee to human being, or the apes to human being, there is a small mutation, right. So, now if you take this, the limbic system, that is to do with hunger, thirst, sex, reproduction, because that is an important part of sex, is important part of the reproduction in higher animals. So, you have to have that is attached to the hormone and linked to the hormone and all that. And then you, as you progress further into mammals, the mammals also initially had neocortex developed, certain parts well developed, like if you dog, cats, their olfaction part is much more developed. And then higher animals like chimpanzees, apes and humans, they had more and more visual power. They are less and less. That is why we are able to smell much less. The power of olfaction in cats and dogs is much far higher, and this thing. And but our smell is very this thing, power of smell is so poor, and we rely more on the visual acuity. So visual power became, because the cortex, occipital cortex responsible, became more and more developed. And when it comes to human being, the transformation from apes and chimpanzees to become human actually had a mutation. That mutation provided a sequence in the DNA which provided some protein formation that helped the formation of complex neuronal structures formation in the prefrontal cortex. That became the center of the cognitive power. So that became the center of the cognitive power, which no other animal had it. Now when it came to cognitive power, now you have a cognitive power that can suppress your limbic system, but the cognitive power can be exploited, because cognitive power gives the power of creating softwares for all the people. You can put softwares, you can train a cat also, but the ability to train them is very difficult, not as good as we, right? We can be trained much better, right? But the problem associated with this, to develop such a complex brain, right, the skull size has to go up, but once the skull size goes up, it will be impossible to for a mother to deliver. So it has to be delivered prematurely. So the selection, the evolutionary selection made sure those mothers, the human mothers, so called human mothers, who couldn't deliver prematurely, they all died off. And the DNA, the people who were able to deliver prematurely and care for their babies and take care of them for the further development of their physical and neurological brain, survived, and that is how we came into being. And imagine our brain size goes by 2 to 2.5 times or more from the birth time of our head skull size. But the neurons are same, but the connections are increasing. That is why the first 5 years is the maximum brain size development. So, but that you can't deliver, mother will die.
Yeah.
So this evolution selection of the why you have to have that much brain. You have got that much of this brain for your survival. So the mammals, they were 4-footed, and then chimpanzees started walking up using only 2 feet, and then we became so designed, because in savannas where plainly little bit of grassy land, you have to look far to detect a threat and then run away from that, which no animals can do. Our eyes were at the highest point, because we are now raised. Okay. Most of the animals, their nose are at higher point, because they can do this more than we can do, right? Right. Okay. So at the higher point, I mean, if I'm talking in terms of the water level, they can survive. We can't survive. We have to learn swimming, because our nose will not. For us to grow a nose on top of our head, we will have to wait for another maybe millions years to do that. So we can't do that. Yes. So I will come to that later. But for the time being, now we come to a stage where the baby has to be delivered prematurely in terms of the brain development for the benefit of the species. Otherwise the mother will die and the whole species will die. So we have come to that, and we have been successful, and we are now becoming a human being. And that gives the ability, because the brain is still developing, still there are connections forming from between neurons, that gives the ability to learn new language, new concept, new softwares, new philosophies, new science, new this, new that, everything. No other animal can match it. They can match maybe small 1 or 2 to talk or train few things, but not as good as human beings. That ability goes on till 25 years, right. So we evolved into become a thinking animal first time. Others also think, but they can't think as much as we could. So it became a thinking animal. But the disadvantage of brain is, if you take energy consumption for unit weight, brain is the highest apart from the heart. Heart is a mechanical object that contracts, so obviously you understand it has to contract and then it needs energy. But other than the normal organs, even kidney does much more job, but its extraction energy is much less. But the brain needs a much more energy in the whole of human body. So, that is a real disadvantage for us. So, and what you have to do? You have to cut down on your muscle power, you cut down all this, but most of those neurons for muscle there, but the connections are not for those thinking cognitive functions. That is why the brain became big. If you take elephant or this thing, proportionally their brain is less, because their brain is to cater to their muscles mostly, not for thinking. Their brain proportional to the body size is small compared to human being. Human size is more, not because the muscle is less compared, it is the reverse of it, paradoxical, but still your brain is more, because you need that brain for your cognitive and learning and simulation and so on. So, now become human being, that is where the consciousness comes. Even other animals have consciousness, not that it does not have, they do not have consciousness, they have consciousness. They have some software, you can learn, you can teach them to do few things, dogs and cats. So, you can put a little bit of software to teach them. Now, human has gone into the era of even creating some hardwares, but they are not good at it, but they can create all kind of softwares. You can put philosophies, as I said earlier, but now they are encroaching into, they encroached earlier also into few hardwares like a pacemaker, ear device, hearing device, visual device, and so on and so forth. They are now evolving, right. So, likewise, so the human is at a higher level. Human, when he upgrades himself or through other means, he will become a hardware producer, not by the human at the moment, but he can evolve into a hardware producer.
Dr. Roohullah, can the human who is at this era right now, like, can we expect by the laws of evolution that there will be a supreme human being in the future, for example, like who can understand, because we take computers and we take devices to support us in terms of our brain. For example, if we do not know anything, it is just a matter of within a one click we can get the details, but sometimes like most of the children in this era tend to think that I do not have to study a lot because everything is in the phone. I can always log into the phone, I can always log into the computer and find things out. Most of the books are being thrown away right now because some of the education, some of the knowledge, they say they can always, like within seconds, they can they can refer from the books, from the phones itself. So, do you think that the humans will evolve, their brains will evolve into a supreme human being, or our knowledge and the memory and the mentally we get retarded or we go down in the line? Because some of these theories say even though we are human, sometimes for the lack of understanding in terms of having an interest in terms of studying, our brains may go down in the line. There may be a peak and there may be a downscale in our brain as well if we do not start innovating, if we do not start thinking, if we do not start expanding our horizons.
Okay, good question again. If you look at the history, if you have any evidence to go by, you have to go by the history. The history of evolution, if you believe the true one, we will someday evolve to be even higher versed, even more cognitive powerful being. There may be one or two will go in the wrong direction and this thing, but there are always opportunities to become more intellectually powerful, right? More and more intellectually powerful. But what is the time period you can wait? Maybe millions. From dinosaur to mammals took about maybe about 5 to 50 million. Dinosaurs were ruling, the reptiles were ruling for 250 million years, and then after about maybe about 200 million years only the mammals came. Thanks to the asteroid, the reptiles were killed off and then mammals thrived. Otherwise, we would not have been mammals and now we know this thing. So, likewise, how long you can wait? Human has a history of only 2 million years, the worst, I mean the longest. But ideal, the Homo sapien has a history of only 150,000 years. So, how long you can wait to become? That is the peak. And what is the purpose at the end of it? And who we will evolve to be, we do not know. So, a lot of uncertainty in it. So, what the human thinks is, it is too long to wait, why do not we create something to go to places where we would love to go, to do things that we can't now humanly possible by innovating few things. What are the innovation they can do? they have this human brain project, they have this human proteome projects, they have this human genome projects.
Okay.
There are a lot of scientists, researchers, engineers, a lot of experts are working on all these projects to find out what we can do to enhance our mental and physical ability. Whether we ourselves can artificially create such an opportunity for ourselves to be an organic being and be more Superman, or we have to have a combination, a symbiotic relationship between the inorganic and organic, like your even the pacemaker or your ear device, something like that is symbiotic.
Maybe sort of like a brain chip placed in your
Brain chip. So, that comes as a cyborg.
Okay.
That is, cyborg is a cybernetic organism, right? Cyborg. So, there is a symbiotic relationship. Or we entirely give up on this and go to a totally inorganic, which is called artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Now, so far from the history again, the recent history of scientific development, to go to artificial intelligence is the safest most option. That is the most developed, and that looks the most reachable with less complication.
Okay.
If you take the organic one, you have to meddle too much with your DNA. To cause a mutation, we do not know what it will cause in the end. Maybe you can combine now, because the genome project, know they can use this system called CRISPR and Cas9 system. They can take a sequence out and put a new sequence in. Maybe you can take a eagle's eye vision that is coding its DNA, that sequence, and take that out and put it into a human DNA in the fetal level.
Okay.
I mean before the sperm level, sperm or this thing,
okay.
and you will get a better eye vision.
Okay. Okay.
Whether that will work, we do not know, because there is not only the genetics, there is a thing called epigenetics.
Okay.
Because that DNA, that sequence in that DNA with the neighboring DNAs, it formed the protein that gave the development of the eye cones and rods in such a way, it became so powerful to watch, I mean to pinpoint. Whether with this DNA, neighbor DNAs, this is not the same DNA neighbors you put in, whether they will cooperate with this newly inserted DNA to produce the same protein that will create the baby's eye so powerful as eagle, we do not know.
Yes.
So, there is a chance you are taking. It is a risk you are taking, it is a gamble, it can go wrong, and whether that will serve the purpose we want, or it will do entirely the opposite, to do some huge damage, we do not know. It is a big ask to take.
Yes.
So, my thought is, okay, we will not do with that, we will try and play with these neurochemicals in the brain. You know, the neurochemicals, the major important neurochemicals are oxytocin, which is very important for causing connection between people, I mean communication, connection, feel like want to belong to somebody, we want to connect to somebody, that kind of feeling, you get the connection. Then the dopamine reward system, where you do good thing, you feel rewarded, you do bad thing, you are dizzy, but you expect something good and that does not happen, it is a negative of this thing.
Okay.
So, you get depressed, not rewarded. But you expect something bad, the bad happened, you are not that bad, because you expected good, some good, it happened, you are good. Okay. I mean, you are something happened, it good. Something you expect and it didn't happen, good happened, you will be totally depressed. Something bad you expected and happened also, you are not that bad.
Okay.
So, those system is controlled by the dopamine. Other one is this serotonin. Serotonin is actually a drug. Okay. It is like drug. It related to all the kinds of emotion, depression, excitation, exhilaration. So, that is why they are using these neuromodulators, the serotonin receptor antagonists, to treat these depressive patients and so on and so forth. And on top of that, they are using little bit of germ cells to repair certain things that is damaged. So, again meddling with the brain and so on and so forth. But this meddling with the hormone may become successful, may not become successful, but you will feel not an extra powerful physically, because your same physique, because you did not meddle with the DNA there, yes, right. But if you modulate the DNA's frequency, you can become a Superman. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there can be consequences as well.
Yeah, there will be consequences.
Yeah.
But neuromodulation, you can go into different realities.
Okay.
There are a lot of realities you called subjective, intersubjective, objective realities. So, you can go into different illusion and this thing. So, I will talk about that later. So, that kind of things happens with the neuromodulation. But the best thing it can happen is use the totally inorganic AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Okay.
They are now already they have done so many humanoid robots like Sophia. If you put into this thing, humanoid brain, humanoid robo made totally artificial, okay. AI, artificial intelligence with neural networks and this and that. They created put a small digital mind into a brain, and they can answer a few things and express few emotions. Okay. So that can be further developed into become your servant to do things. You can ask them to fly to somewhere, to go to moon and come back, okay. Or you do something, you take this load or do some surgeries elsewhere. Okay. So that can happen in the future. That is the most likeliest possibilities. Okay. So you are transcending your human barriers, okay. To become a superhuman being. Okay. Either you can biologically become, that is techno-humanism, okay. Like DNA modeling or neurological substances, or this is called data. Okay. You collect data, and then you collect them, and then you create a more and more sophisticated algorithms. Okay. And the algorithms, more and more data collection, it becomes better and better algorithm. And the better algorithm gives a better result. Okay. So your chance of succeeding is more and more improves more, right? So that is how it becomes. The data is what the mathematics, right? It's a collection of the statistics and collection of information. So actually, what Einstein practiced is he thought and then found something amazing. And then he translated that into mathematical equation. That is how he translated, that is how you say the mathematics is the language of physics. But that didn't end there. Then there was a story when the first time it was used outside physics was when two Scottish Christian priests set out to start a pension fund. They wanted to collect few data the first time, and then they collected data. They used it as a pension fund. Okay. So that is how now the statistics, learning statistics is part of almost any stream offered in any university, whether medicine or commerce or science, astronomy, anything. So that is data. The data only becomes finally the artificial intelligence. So the algorithm, when it is multiple layered, like artificial neural network can learn a lot and then can do new things that is not even programmed. So that is where we are hoping this artificial neural network based on the human brain project will evolve to be a game changer for the humanity, to explore space, to explore, detect chemical threat or explosive threats and then sort out them, and likewise a lot of things can happen in this thing. So why you think that now? There are three things in the brain. One is memory, computation and then learning. The science has found out you don't need to have an organic brain, because the organic brain also lump of matter, and how it can create memory and computation and then it can learn. They wondered. Then human brain project, they found out it's not necessary to be organic matter. Any matter can be made to become a device which can memorize, okay. compute and learn. Okay. So they thought it is substrate independent. Actually what you need to do is, who makes this substrate independent this capable devices? The people in the so called Silicon Valley in America now. Okay. Because they arrange elements in a certain way, any element, it can be silicon or any element, and that started memorizing and computing. And then they had to do another program in the element a certain way, and the state, the change of state of the element that is there, they did some tricks and made it, and they started learning also. So it can learn, it can memorize, it can compute it. when you think of consciousness, when I just touch on this consciousness, there are 3 types of consciousness. You sit, don't do any movements, don't think, you watch a movie.
Okay.
Just follow what is there in the movie, and that is the one type of consciousness. You don't think, you don't move. Second, a photo is flashed at you, you immediately recognize the face and you say, this is Albert Einstein or somebody. The active recalling of that memory is called another kind of memory,
Okay.
right? That is tier 1, tier 3, that memory. But just looking at that, you are recalling, but the brain is subconsciously doing lot of computation to see all that taking data, so all the data it is taking and sending it to the cortex and checking with the storage memory power, and lot of computation is doing all the connection, neuronal connection, and finally you come out with the answer. But when you are asked to multiply 25 by 30, you are at a struggle. Why is that? Because those don't happen subconsciously. The remembering a photo, immediate recognizing, most of the computation, 99% happening without this thing, and then that is probably it is encoded. This is, you have to know, if you say 7 into 7, you will say, because you have been asked to remember that, that you will say, but when you ask 31 into 31, you can't.
Yes.
So, that you have to do consciously. But there are people who have mastered that, that is why they can do some fast calculations. So, but it is a matter of practicing and ability to use the state of the different state of the elements to your advantage to learn new things.
Great. So, Dr. Roohullah, I think we have come to the end of the program, and I think we have, from our scientific discussion, we have led our people to think more beyond the scope that they have thought about science. And we have talked about certain projects like the Human Genome Project, the Brain Development Project, and so on. I think we will have some more time in the future as well for our viewers to speak about it more in terms of these projects and in terms of brain development programs that are going on currently in this world. Dr. Roohullah, just to finalize and touch upon, can you just say something as a take-home message for our viewers? For example, we have spoken about most of the valuable things about the development, and as well as the innovations and what's going on in terms of the human brain, as well as how this whole genesis happen in this world. So, as a take-home message, what's your final message to our viewers, Dr. Roohullah?
So, in strict scientific perspective, that is what I believe it to be true. I feel our power of consciousness and power of cognitive can be exploited, right, to good and bad as well. So, what you read become what you are, like what you eat, what physically you are, what you read become what you are mentally and spiritually or whatever. So, these are softwares, teaching at the very primary school, learning things, remembering mother's face from the beginning till the end of time, your film you watched, the stories you read, the people you met and the parties you had and lectures you attended, all that softwares. So, you should have a final analysis of yourself, whether what I am learning is it good for me and the society around me, where how I can be good to other people using this ability, not to harm others, going strictly by a philosophy or anything. You better know yourself that you are a person with the device that is always learning, that can be manipulated easily depending on who tells you what and what you read and what you gather. So, use your this thing, those are no fixed, you can call 100% right or wrong, that is why a lot of conflicts. Initially the philosophy helped for the cooperation of the human beings, and that is how we become peaceful society. But now we have to go, I think, beyond those to incorporate the whole human beings in the globe, using science as a platform, common platform to enlighten ourselves, to become good citizens and to be good to others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roohullah. As a doctor as well as being a specialist in anesthesia, Dr. Roohullah has done wonderful work in his career. Thank you so much, doctor. You have spent great deal of your time, and also I wish you all the best in terms of having a good understanding about reading more articles and moreover, like trying to like come up with certain concepts and certain ideas, not your opinion, but the science that you have studied to our viewers. I think we will have more and more programs from you in the near future so that our people can have a good understanding about science so that they can transmit their knowledge to other people. Thank you so much, doctor,
Thank
for
you
your
very
time.
much.
Thanks a lot. Hi, I'm Dr. Namal Vijay Singh and this is our YouTube channel. Do not forget to subscribe our YouTube channel and click that bell icon to receive all our new videos.